Thank you very much, Jill, and it's my great opportunity to be able to speak with you all today. Today what I'll be doing is talking about ideas about how to increase urban tree canopy and the tools that we've developed for that kind of business approach. But it's also, fundamentally, it's a way to think outside the tree pit. And I'll be making this presentation on behalf of the other people who are part of the Forest Service's Urban Tree Canopy development team. That includes Dexter, who will also be speaking, Mike Galvin, who some of you know, and Jarlath O'Neill Dunn, who's done a lot of work on the urban tree canopy assessment. In terms of what we'll be speaking about today, one of which is how have the urban tree canopy tools been developed? How did UTC begin? What does it mean to think outside the tree pit? What are some of the UTC tools and how they help think outside the tree pit? And as we get into that section, we'll be switching over to Dexter, who will be speaking. And then Dexter will be offering some concluding thoughts. So how have the UTC tools been developed? They've been developed primarily through our work at the Forest Service's Baltimore Field Station. And in doing so, we've been developing these tools, and it'll come up in the history, in a way that works with our local partners, with Baltimore City, different public agencies, nonprofits, private business, and community groups, both in the city and in the surrounding counties. And it's been dynamic as we helped solve one question, one problem. New ideas and questions arise, and then we work to solve those. And so it becomes cumulative, and that'll be evident in the way that we talk about the tools today, how we worked to do one thing, and then it led to the development of a new set of tools. And the business model for this wider application and refinement follows a progression of we pilot these tools in one place, we prototype it, we test out the pilot in other places, and then we kind of get to an enterprise approach where it's good to go, it's battle tested, and we feel pretty comfortable and confident with how it's going to work. And to give you an idea of that progression too, when we first did the urban tree canopy assessment for Baltimore City, it took us about 9 months to do. When we then applied it to Annapolis, when we were going to prototype, it took us about 3 months to do. And then when Jarlath did that work for New York City, it took 5 days. And then we felt pretty good that we got into the enterprise level. And so that's kind of the progression that we go to in developing the UTC tools. So a little bit about how UTC began. It first starts with our research work that we were doing in Baltimore. And one of the things that we were discovering through our work, and I won't go into all the science, but what we discovered is that urban riparian areas are not effective for removing nitrogen from the water, which is typically how rural riparian areas work. In fact, it turns out that urban riparian areas are actually a source of nitrogen that flows into the streams. Now, this was problematic in the Chesapeake Bay program because they had established a goal of planting 200 miles of riparian areas with trees in the Chesapeake Bay watershed by 2020. And that 200 miles in 2020 was purely accidental in the presence of all those twos and zeros, of course. What we realized with this is that the urban areas were not going to be really effective, useful for meeting that policy goal. In fact, by planting trees in those urban areas, we may actually be increasing the contribution of nitrogen into the streams. And as we were developing this research at Maryland DNR Forest Service said, okay, well, if you're so smart in that planting urban riparian areas is not actually useful for achieving the goals of that policy, then what would be the approach? And what we said was, in realizing that the reason the nitrogen was getting into streams because those urban riparian areas had become disconnected, we realized that what we actually had to do was look at other parts of the city that were connected and intercept water through evapotranspiration as that water came off of roofs and so on. And so we said, really, the policy should reflect the fact that in an urban area, all forest patches, all those tree pits, but also all of those verges, your front yards, your backyards, and so on, they are what are connected, and that any kind of goal to achieve those policies of the Chesapeake Bay program should focus on an overall urban tree canopy goal. With that in mind, and I'll talk about it later, they asked us to do an urban tree canopy assessment. So what does it mean to think outside the tree pit? This equation is a basic equation for thinking inside the tree pit. And in order to achieve an urban tree canopy goal, you have what already exists, what you plant, what grows through protection and maintenance, and trying to minimize your losses. And what we're learning is that a great deal of achieving an urban tree canopy goal does have to look at trying to reduce your losses, but it also has to look at where do you have existing places to plant trees. And this is a typical kind of equation that we have to keep in mind when we're thinking inside the tree pit. But what we discovered with urban tree canopy work is that there's much more that exists outside this tree pit. And what do we find outside the tree pit as we're doing our urban tree canopy work? First of all, one concern is what's the majority of owners, that we can achieve significant and multiple benefits, as Tom was indicating, and that there may be untapped resources that could contribute to both the conservation of the existing canopy cover as well as planting of new trees. And so what we started to learn is within the context of the Chesapeake Bay policy context is that, first of all, that we establish these urban tree canopy goals. Second is that policy is changing for the Chesapeake Bay. And it's more than just planting of trees, but it's also looking at what is your net change, whether it's negative or positive, and that you can lose trees in a lot of ways. You can lose it through diseases, you can lose it through failure of maintenance, you can lose it through development. And in the context of the Chesapeake Bay, all of those possible losses are going to count against what the cities are doing. From a practical context of thinking outside the tree pit, first of all is it's very limited in terms of what the city can do over the majority of landowners. What we discovered through the UTC work is that the majority of landowners is that private residential set of owners, and there's very little authority over them. Second, and again, as Tom indicated, the trees are essential for achieving many benefits, and they're associated with a number of different stakeholders, and we need to be able to figure out how to include those benefits and to recruit those stakeholders. And finally, the stakeholders may come with additional resources. In fact, they may have resources that are much greater than what the city arborist has in their budget, and we really need to figure out how to leverage and tap into those resources. So here's the set of tools that we've developed so far. First of all is urban tree canopy assessments. Second is how to prioritize where to plant trees. Third is the market analysis. And then fourth is change analysis. So this is, and it gives it some indication of what we're doing in terms of the UTC assessment. On the far left is what the remotely sensed imagery looks like. On the far right is what it looked like with the National Land Cover database of tree canopy. And then in the middle is what we're able to do with the high-resolution land cover mapping that we're doing. And this land cover mapping is done through a combination of the National Agricultural Imagery Program data that's collected for every state once every 3 years, and LIDAR data, which helps us to assess the heights of the vegetation and also to deal with issues of shade where trees might be hiding from our four-band imagery, but we find with LIDAR. There's some things here to note, one of which is that with the NLCD database, you're only being able to find trees in those areas where there's large forest patches. And what we have here with the middle indicating is not only that we're able to pick out where all these trees are, but also that we can start to integrate this with other databases such as parcel-level databases that are critical for integrating with municipal data systems. I'd like to note here that I think that our job is getting to the point where it is done in terms of UTC assessment. What I mean by this is that I think that municipalities are no longer going to need to be acquiring their own UTC assessments. I think that they're going to start to become available on a state-by-state basis. Certainly this is the case for Chesapeake Bay, where the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed is going to be mapped. And increasingly we're seeing this going to be happening on a state-by-state basis. So then the real trick is to think about, okay, how do we take these UTC assessments and start to think about different ways that we can use them? One of the things that came out of the UTC assessments also is that, and this slide intends to show it, is that most of the canopy cover is on those parcels, that private residential, and also that's where most of the land is to be able to plant trees. When we did the first assessment for Baltimore, what became very clear was that there was no way that they could achieve their urban tree canopy goal by planting in all of the rights-of-ways in the parks. There was no way that they could achieve it by planting on all of the public land for the city. And what we see here in Philadelphia, and this makes it more clear by breaking it out in terms of land use, is that residential is the big player in all of this work. And working with the residential landowners, as I mentioned before, with whom we have no direct authority, is going to be critical for achieving UTC goals and achieving many of the benefits that we seek. Second tool that we've developed is UTC prioritization. What we have here on the left is a prioritization map for the city of Baltimore. It was achieved by a stakeholder process where we conducted a survey. People could vote for the different types of benefits that they sought. We used a model of people could vote early and often. They could vote, everyone got 10 votes, and they could put 10 votes into, say, really caring about urban heat island or really caring about water, or they could spread out their votes among a number of different benefits. On the far right-hand side is a pie chart that shows how that voting went, with a lot of people voting for different types of activities to address water issues, the red, things to address urban heat island, and then also wanting to do these activities where there was a lot of existing community support and organization in order to get the trees planted. One of the benefits of the prioritization is that rather than trying to force everyone to agree on the priorities, we relax that, we let everyone vote. And even if people didn't agree on what were the priorities, what we started to see was they agreed on the places. And so we could move beyond having everyone have to agree on the priorities because they agreed on the places, and then we could move on in terms of thinking about, okay, what could we do in these places in order to increase canopy cover? Now, when we think about those places and trying to move forward, what we also need to do is think about how do we build coalitions? How do we get those stakeholders involved in wanting to advance these tree planting goals? We can take that pie chart that I showed previously and we can look at it in terms of a tree diagram where we can see who has common interests and start to build those coalitions. But then we could also look at the different site types that we have. And here, when we agree upon those places are made up of private residential areas, street trees, parks, schoolyards. And as part of our survey that we did with the stakeholders who participated was to ask, where did they work? And through that combination of the interests and the site types, we can move on to the specific places and build coalitions where, say, you may be interested in planting trees in the streets. I handle the private residential areas. We need to find someone who's going to work in the schools so we can develop a comprehensive approach and put together all those different types of sites along with the interests in order to be able to advance tree planting in any one of those high priority areas. This part of the activity of prioritization is really critical as a social phenomenon. And we developed the tools not only to do the data analysis, but also the social practices for how to engage those stakeholders.